Hello and welcome as you're joining us today. Just give it another minute while everybody's settling in. Thanks everyone for being here. We're excited to be with you today. I'm mindful of our time, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward and get started. My name is Julie Sauvé. I'm one of the Senior Implementation Specialists at Harmony Academy, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for today's session. We're so excited that you chose to join us today, and we're excited to kick off our pathway to our Belonging Workshop series. Today, Dr. Terrell Strayhorn will kick us off, and you'll hear more about the remaining 3 sessions with all of our all-star lineup at the end of today's workshop. Throughout the series, each of these thought leaders will help us understand how belonging can increase student attendance, boost academic achievement, promote educator retention, and enhance school climates, issues that we all know are critical to school leaders and districts today. The good news is that you're already signed up for the entire series, and you can join all the other sessions using the same Zoom link that you used today. We're hosting these unique workshops to bring together thought leaders to share ways that belonging can support social, personal, and academic learning. These presentations are the opinions and content of our guest speakers and may not necessarily be a direct representation of Harmony. Before we begin, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items. So first, you and all registrants will receive a copy of the recording to watch as well as to share with your colleagues. So be on the lookout for that in your email. We love seeing your smiling faces on camera today. So if you feel comfortable, I invite you to have your camera on, but if you prefer to have your camera off during the recording, we understand. Next, throughout the session today, we encourage you to use the chat to share your ponderings, questions, or any ahas that you may have as we aim to keep the session interactive. And finally, at the end of the session, I want to let you know we will provide some time for you to ask Dr. Strayhorn some questions. So now, without further ado, let's dive into the first session of our series. Today, we're beginning with Virtual Workshop 1, Belonging, the missing ingredient in improving student performance and well-being. To start, please share in chat your role and where you're joining us from. We'd love to get to feel for who is joining us today. Welcome, Grace. We're happy to have you. Wonderful, Stephanie. Good to have you from Clark County School District. We appreciate you joining. Lizette, welcome. Jamie, welcome as well. There's a lot of people from the West today. Olga, welcome. Happy to have you. I also see several of my colleagues here from the Harmony team, so welcome for all of those of you that are joining from National School District or National University or Harmony as well. Thank you, Cynthia. Good to have you with us. All right, thank you, everyone. And if you want to still put your name and where you're coming from today in the chat, you're welcome to if you didn't do so. So during today's session, we'll hear about the research effects of belonging. We'll set the stage for this series by defining belonging, sharing why it matters to schools and districts, and discuss how it can be measured as drivers of success. At the end of the workshop, we'll highlight what is ahead for this engaging series that you won't want to miss. So to get things started, to get our discussion rolling today, we'd actually like to hear a bit more from you about what your thoughts are of belonging through a quick poll. So although we'll be discussing the effects of belonging today, Amanda, you can see, just launched the poll for us. And it asks, what do you think would happen if belonging becomes the next innovation in all schools? And you'll see there that you have some options that you can check on. So we'll give just a minute for everybody to take a second to fill out the poll. Great. It looks like there's still some people filling it out, so we'll give it another minute. All right, and just about everybody's participated. And so I just want to recap what we're seeing here, which, is we provided you with some ideas or ways in which perhaps belonging could help in terms of becoming the next innovation in all schools. And interestingly, though we have a lot of really good responses there, most everybody agreed that it's really that if belonging were to become the innovation in all schools, that really it would be supporting all of these things. As we know, they're all critical components that we'd love to see improvements in schools. So thank you so much for participating in the poll. And now we're going to go ahead and jump forward. I am thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Terrell Strayhorn and to have him lead our conversation today. Dr. Strayhorn is an internationally recognized student success scholar, highly acclaimed public speaker, and his award-winning writer. Dr. Strayhorn is author of 14 books and over 200 book chapters and journal articles and other scholarly publications. He also has given thousands of invited keynotes and lectures at more than 2,000 universities, schools, companies, and conferences across the globe. Dr. Strayhorn is president and CEO of Do Good Work Consulting Group, and he currently serves as professor of education and psychology at Virginia Union University, where he's also associate provost and interim dean of the School of Education. Dr. Strayhorn, welcome. We're so grateful that you're joining us today.
Thank you, Julie. Delighted to be here and excited about today's conversation. So I thought I might kick us off with a couple of opening comments, just framing this discussion. As we'll talk about today, this is the kickoff to a really exciting series. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but first, special thanks again to Julie, to Amanda, to the entire Harmony team for your hard work of putting together what promises to be a really successful series. And to all of the educators, both in the room and those who will watch and connect with us later, thank you for what you do each and every day, transforming lives, schools, communities, and the world through the teaching and leadership that you have. So I want to talk for a moment about sense of belonging. And one, if you haven't already heard this term, sense of belonging is a feeling. It's a feeling that there's a long line of research, and it's evolving, it's growing, that demonstrates this feeling, this perception, this sensation is more than just high fives and hugs, although those are important. That this feeling facilitates, it nurtures, it encourages and promotes student success. And interestingly enough, my research shows that a strong sense of belonging in schools, in districts, in communities, in colleges and universities is intrinsically tied to the nature of our relationships. That one way students start to feel a sense of belonging is through strong, positive, supportive relationships that are built on trust, respect, and Julie, genuine connection that really breeds this kind of environment, this kind of space where people feel valued, they feel safe, they feel secure, they feel important, integral to the overall group success. It's when a student is in the classroom with a teacher who they know knows their name, maybe even knows their parents, their family, trusts them. And because of that connection, and the fact that the student understands that the instructor, the teacher needs them to raise their hand, needs them to role model for other peers what good citizenship looks like in the classroom, needs them to ask questions. The student picks up a message that is actually delivered by the teacher, directly or indirectly, that you play an important role in this classroom, not just the adults in the school. And that your presence, your participation is integral to the classroom success, the school's success. And when people have those positive connections and they're playing important roles and they feel like their contributions are seen and valued, up emerges sense of belonging. One more thing, real quick, is in terms of education, my research also shows that this feeling is really refers to perceptions. It's the student's perception and belief that there's support for me, a feeling that someone cares about me, someone's in my corner. Doesn't mean that they don't challenge me or give me constructive feedback. It doesn't mean I always get straight A's either. There are students who are middle of the road getting B's and C's, some who have even failed but left feeling that sense of belonging. Why? Because the instructor, the teacher, the school didn't leave them to in their misery of failing the quiz or failing the test, but caught them with that safety net that we all try to provide to help them know, look, you may not have done well in the quiz, but this is why we're going to give you tutoring. We're going to give you some coaching. I'm going to be available before and after class. And all of this reflects that community of care that nurtures belonging. And there are three important points I hope we can talk about here that's come out of my research lately. So, sense of belonging is about relationship. But one of the things we've got to think about, and I hope we can talk about throughout the series with our guests that you'll hear about later, is relational consistency, right? It's important to have relationships, but true belonging comes from relationships that persist and grow and evolve over time. So, what are we doing to ensure that our students have continued interactions with their teachers throughout the year? How are we dealing with turnover and teacher burnout that can disrupt relational consistency? Secondly, it's hard to feel like you belong in a classroom or a school or a district when you don't know where things are and you don't know how to navigate the system physically or even in a policy process kind of way. So, how are we enabling and empowering our students and families to learn how to navigate the classroom, to seek and access the resources we provide? Navigational capital is critically important. And then lastly is this notion I'm calling reciprocal visibility. People feel a sense of belonging when they feel seen and heard. But also, how are we developing a space where teachers and students feel seen and heard? And that all students, regardless of the zip code that they live in, or if they're first in their family to go to school, or if their first language is English, that all of them feel seen, heard, respected in a way that's dynamic and reciprocal. I'll stop there. These are just my initial thoughts, Julie. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Love that. Thank you so much. And I just want to jump right into each of those and learn more. So I look forward to learning about this from the rest of the series. Um, so I have a question for you, and you spoke to this, but I mean, when you're talking about belonging being a sense, it's a feeling, right? It's something that can be nurtured. I'm sure you're going to talk about it a little bit more, but I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what are some of those essential ingredients that you see as part of belonging. Again, not to spoil the rest of the series. So if you're going to talk about that, we can hold off on it as well.
No, it's a great question and a great follow-up. I mean, I've already started to sprinkle some of
Yeah.
those ingredients out there. People, the challenge that we have with belonging, especially belonging research, is this. I've never met too many people who, when they hear sense of belonging, they're like, oh my gosh, that's too far-fetched. I don't get it. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I have the opposite response where people hear and people presume because it's so sort of matter of fact that they understand what it is. Belonging is a feeling, and some of the key ingredients, though, that lead to a sense of belonging, especially for students in learning spaces. One is identification, that you know me. How do we communicate or signal or cue? That's the term we're going to use a lot throughout the series. How do we cue to people that we know them? We know their name. We know where the accent falls. My name is Terrell. I always know when someone doesn't really know me when I am introduced by them and they say, hi, Tyrell, Terrell, Terrence. I know lots of people who pronounce that same spelling that way, but my mom told me it's Terrell. And so when
Mm-hmm.
teachers and educators create spaces where we know students' names, where we know things about them so that as we're teaching chemistry and math and history, English and literacy, that we can anchor it into the lived realities of our students. Give examples. I used to be a public school teacher in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I remember being a music teacher, getting my students ready for the state exam. And one question was on the sort of practice exam. and the word was canoe. Now, my elementary school was in a Title I, low income, primarily community of color. And so many students they didn't know what a canoe was. And if you think about it, culturally relevant or responsive, how would they? When was
Mhm.
the last time they probably saw a canoe? So I had to bridge the learning. First of all, introduce them to the term, even in a music class,
Mhm.
give them visual images so they can have a point of reference, but then also bridge the learning to other things that they needed to know or that they knew about. Like it's kind of like a boat, it's kind of like an automotive, right? So, how do we make students feel a sense of belonging when learning is connected and anchored in their lived experience? Now,
Mhm.
some people would hear that lesson and say, well, that wasn't on your script for the day. That was above and beyond the call of duty. I'm not sure that's true. I think as an instructor who wants my students to succeed, then we, sort of exhaust ourselves of all of our abilities and resources and training to make sure that the message isn't lost, that they pick up what we put down. And to do that, we've really got to know our students, know our families, know them well, and then bring that into these kinds of connected ways of learning that are personalized, human, custom, or customized to the student's experience and their learning needs is exactly the sort of formula for success when it comes to belonging.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about some of your research and more like the background and the evidence of belonging.
Yeah, it's a great question. I get this question all the time, and that is, so belonging matters. Yes. Um, what are the sort of core ingredients? And some of those we've talked about in the previous slide. Um, we'll come to the end and talk about why this all matters. But I've spent more time with principals and assistant principals, superintendents, policymakers who want to know sort of the big picture and the bottom line. And here's what you got to know. Although sense of belonging is nurtured, facilitated through micro kinds of actions, knowing a student's name, demonstrating care, concern, um, employing constructive feedback, growth minded feedback as an approach to student evaluation. And you can train a whole, galaxy of teachers on growth minded approaches to student evaluation and assessment. But the message is clear that when educators use growth minded feedback, the feeling that it cues to students, or the message that sent to students, is someone cares about me. I'm capable of learning. You know, my instructor, my teacher sees my value, sees my ability, my worth, cares enough about my ideas that they're like engaging in a dialogue or discussion about it. And those feelings then track on to success. So, as shown on the screen, I've shown time and time again, when students are learning in classrooms and schools, where they feel cared about, they feel seen and heard, safe, secure, respected, like their contributions and their presence matter, they go to school. So you start seeing how it immediately tackles chronic absenteeism and starts to create spaces where students are compelled to come, they run to come. The second thing is that not only do they show up in school and in class, but they are more likely to ask questions because you've removed that veil, you remove that threat of, um, you know, a stereotype of believing like, oh my gosh, if I raise my hand and ask a question, it will reveal that I don't know something. You've created a space where students can feel comfortable asking questions, understanding that improvement is part of the process, and that, learning and challenge are just part of the formula for success, and that I get better the more I ask questions. I get better the more I try. Even if I fail, I can, sort of fail forward and still succeed. I've got support in the room for me. And so what that means is they're more engaged in learning. They're more likely to ask questions. They turn in assignments on time. And these are the kinds of academic behaviors and practices that most teachers know we typically reward favorably, which means their grades go up. And when their grades go up, they're more likely to be retained. And upon successful retention, they're more likely to cross the finish line. And so, as this shows, summarizing insights from a number of studies. I found that they are more likely to receive academic rewards when they feel a sense of belonging. They're less likely to be placed on academic warning or dismissal. And there's a pretty clear sense that when students feel a sense of belonging, they become more engaged in the school as bona fide members. So, what does that mean? It translates into they're more involved in clubs and organizations, more likely to run for office and be a peer leader. I think these are the kinds of robust, positive educational outcomes that we all pursue. It's in every strategic plan, it's in every school plan. But the question becomes, what role does belonging play in our overall school and district strategy for student success? I've seen belonging tucked into diversity plans. I've seen belonging tucked into school climate plans. But this conversation and this series is going to help us understand belonging is the key to academic success. And then what can we do as teachers, as leaders, as educators to start using it in these effective ways?
And thanks for making that connection. That ultimately it's a foundation for academic success. I know from my experience being teaching that a lot of times we as teachers understand and know the value of belonging, but sometimes we might not know exactly those little micro behaviors that you were talking about that we need to enact within our classrooms to build it. But then also on the other hand, how do you measure it, right? So I really appreciate you making that very explicit connection between the actual sense of belonging that students are feeling, their engagement, and how all of these things then turn and relate into more positive academic outcomes.
Yeah, and it's a really great comment. I don't want to give away too much thunder because we're going to have some other folks join us in the series to come. But listen, to everyone who's watching, listening, you gotta join. You gotta register now for these sessions. But your question about measuring it is another typical question that I get: is how do you measure it, or is it
Mhm.
belonging too difficult to measure? And the answer is, no. Here's one thing that we should know. And I use this a lot in my own research as a larger scale around belonging. But I want you to think about the students that you work with. And one way that we measure belonging is asking students on surveys, sometimes even in interviews, um, to rate the extent to which they agree with several statements. One of them being, people at my school would miss me if I disappeared suddenly.
Mm.
Thank you, Julie. I love that sound. That's the brain saying like, "Oh yeah."
Yep.
But it comes from that that you gave that we didn't even practice. That's the feeling, right? That's the
Yeah.
feeling that we all long for.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to believe that if I disappeared, somebody would miss me at work, at
Yeah.
home, at school, at play, on the field or in the classroom, right? So then the question, you flip it to all the educators, especially that's where the real expertise is. It's in the audience, of course. But you
Mhm.
think about, what do you do in your classroom, in the hallway, at the door, as they're coming off the bus or online, that starts to help them realize, like, I need you here.
Yeah.
If you disappear tomorrow, I'm coming to look for you. And I'll save it for a series, what, 2 or 3 down the road. But there have been times where I've asked students, like, would people miss you? And students who feel a sense of belonging say absolutely yes. Students who don't feel a sense of belonging say no.
Yeah.
And if you ask those who say yes, who are you talking about? You realize it takes a village to raise and to educate students, learners of any age, right? You hear about teachers, you hear about teacher aides, you hear about substitutes, you hear the names of principals, assistant principals, office workers, clerical staff, bus drivers, cafeteria workers. All of us play a role in helping that student feel that sense of belonging. So before we run out of too much time, and I want to make sure we have time for a couple of questions, if that's appropriate for you, Julie,
Mhm.
let's dive a little deeper. So I've conducted studies. I thought I might just highlight one. That what I did was I worked with a team of graphic and sort of cool creative souls. I love those folks who helped me create these vignettes, small videos. They can be powered through the web on your
Mhm.
computer, on your smart device. And then I found test sites where students received these video messages, and they would look like what's shown on the screen, where a student would hear from another student, sort of peer, a story about their journey toward educational success. Their stories are not all the same, but there are four key messages that are anchored in these stories. Their stories resonate powerfully with these messages of like, hey, if you've ever felt out of place, that's normal and cool. Everyone feels that way at some point in time. That if you have felt lonely at any point in time in grade school, middle school, high school, you're not the only, and it doesn't stay that way. Third, that if you've ever had a time where you've gone into math class and you thought, I can't pass this quiz, or you did well in math in fourth grade, but by the time you stumbled into math in the fifth grade, you lost all your confidence, don't beat yourself up. All students doubt their abilities. And you got to know that not only do these feelings dissipate with time, but as you ask for help and
Mm.
you get support and you practice and you do the work that's expected of you, things get better. You get better. Your skills get stronger. Before you know it, a person who felt like they were alienated and did not belong is the front of the class, student leader, deeply engaged in their learning, and they're doing well. These are these messages that we curated with different student. These we didn't give them the script. These are student stories. We help them
Mm.
clean it up so they can get across it pretty quickly in a controlled amount of time. But students and schools and colleges watch these videos, Julie, and then over the course of time, we would ask them questions about how they feel, all of
Mhm.
our belonging measures. We track their grades, we track their involvement, we track all that was happening. And what we found was pretty telling that one, students in our experimental group, those who watched the video, had, you know, performed better than their peers. Their peers were a placebo group of students who watched the video, but it wasn't belonging messages. It was just a sort of video so we could control for the effect of
Mhm.
just watching a video. It turns out just watching videos of any kind of nature can start to boost students' sense of belonging. Well, not their sense of belonging, but their sense of confidence in their grades. Then there was another group that we had that had no video, no messages at all. But the interesting thing about this red box shows two things. One, we found the greatest gains for those who received these messages. I want to talk about that for a moment on our last slide. Two, we also saw the greatest boost among those who received those messages or those videos sort of wrapped in an academic support program, right? So if it was through the tutoring program that they were a part of, if it was through a summer bridge program they were a part of, if it was through some club or organization, so it's the community of care with the messages together that starts to represent the constellation of supports and factors that truly boost belonging. I'll talk about it in other sessions. I promise you that we will get to it. But here's what I took from this, Julie, and to the audience, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. One is it's undeniably true. Belonging matters. Everyone wants to belong, whether at home, at work, or school. And feeling a sense of belonging in school leads to high achievement. Belonging is a feeling. So it can't be faked, it can't be forced, we can't inject it in people. You got to
Mm.
just sit back, create the constellation, the conditions for belonging. We do our best work to make sure that students see themselves reflected in our faculty and our staff. They see themselves reflected in the curriculum, that their lived experiences are not just pushed to the margins, but talked about in the video, talked about in the example. Um, that we create space where they can ask questions, where they can share their stories, where they can practice vulnerability. So too can we. That even when they trip up, make mistakes, or make errors, that we correct them with growth minded, constructive kind of feedback anchored in this deep belief, this high expectation that they can perform. When we do that, the sense of belonging is cultivated, it's increased. Faculty and staff play an enormous role in this. And I'm not just talking about our full time instructional teachers, although I am. I'm talking about how we work
Mm.
with our aides in the classroom, our instructional staff, our librarians, so many, our counselors and nurses, so many of these play an important role. And that's why we have to also underscore the important role that peers play. The messages that were anchored in those videos, like, have you ever messed up? Have you ever doubted yourself? We didn't have teachers and principals in the video saying that. It was the peer effect. So
Mhm.
sometimes just creating space for students to tell, advanced students to tell their story to the incoming students packs a punch when it comes to belonging. These messages and cues that I've talked about can be really powerful, especially when repeated and reinforced. So that red box on the previous screen,
Mhm.
we also saw enormous shifts in belonging for students who watch the videos more than once. There's several test sites where students had to watch the videos and log them by watching them at least twice a week. In over a 4-week period, we saw seismic kinds of shifts in their belonging. So it's not just telling students that they matter. It's not just telling students that it's okay if you failed this quiz. Just because you failed the quiz doesn't mean you're going to fail the test, right? That message has
Mhm.
to be ingrained in our policies, in our procedures. It has to shape what we do. And by the way, it's not always just words, right? There are schools where sometimes part of the process of instruction naturally includes revision as a part of the process. You write the draft is not graded. You get feedback on it, right? Then
Mhm.
you write another draft, and that revised draft, you get additional feedback. Now we invite the peers. So see how we're applying the principles that I'm talking about, even in pedagogy and it's policy. Every single classroom in that school is structured this way that students get the message. My first draft is not my last, right? I should
Mhm.
write it, give it my best, but I'm going to get feedback from my instructor, from my peers. I can be reflective. All of this starts to create a space where students can feel a sense of belonging that tracks on to success. And then lastly, these kind of interventions, we're going to talk about more in the series to come, they can be quite effective, both in the short term and the long term. Here's what I'll close with. Sense of belonging is not magic, but when done well, when structured in the ways that we are talking about and that we will talk about in the sessions to come, it can produce magical results.
Awesome. So excited to hear more about that. And thank you for introducing that to us. It's really such an important thing. We want to take some time to hear from our audience today. So we're going to turn the time over to you, audience, and I will invite you to please, you can raise your hand, go off chat or go off of mute, excuse me, or you can go pop in the chat. But this is going to be your time. We would love to hear from you. What are the questions you have for Terrell, or what are your ahas or the things that you're interested in learning more about? And given that we are teachers, we're going to use our effective wait time to give you time to think about that.
So I have a question. Just I teach in a primarily online university, and I think sometimes that's more of a struggle in terms of trying to create a sense of belonging with our students. So I love the idea of having a video put in place that's kind of talking to this point directly. And my question would be, would you do this earlier in the program? Would you do it throughout the program? Like, how do you think it would be best to kind of implement that on a bigger scale or bigger picture? Just because there's probably continuity, like you're saying, if people feel like it changes over time, do we want to kind of address that throughout the curriculum with the video? And I love the idea of doing this. So thank you so much for sharing your ideas as well.
My pleasure. Thank you. And thank you, Mary, for the question. Quick question for you. Is it asynchronous or synchronous online teaching?
It's pretty much asynchronous, and I think that's the key. I've been a big advocate for doing video exchanges with my students so they get to actually see a human face and we kind of connect back and forth in that way. And that seems to make a big difference where suddenly they're like, oh, there's like a human on the other side of the computer, and then they start like sharing more and telling me, all the struggles and they ask questions. So it kind of makes a big difference. So I just really like this idea a lot.
Yep, thank you. That's such an important piece. And so you're right. This can happen, of course, in online instructional spaces. And I think my ideas um, are different depending on if we're talking about synchronous versus asynchronous. I think the video could be quite effective. Um, Here's what we should know. This is sort of on ramp to what you're asking. Most students and most people don't start with a sense of belonging. We actually start in a sense of belonging uncertainty. We enter new spaces, new classrooms, synchronous or asynchronous, new physical classrooms, new buildings, new relationships, wondering, do I belong here? Did I make the right choice? Is this the right fit? And so in that first, sometimes in the undergraduate traditional kind of expense, we're talking about the first 6 weeks. In most schools, we're talking about that first month. I think even in online courses that can be of variable lengths, it's in that initial time period, like you said, Mary, where these questions are swirling throughout the learner's mind, where video that affirms, one, you're not wrong to be thinking that way. It's very human. Two, even though you think that way, you quiet those sounds because you are in the right place. And most people who have succeeded in this class started in that same place, right? So I think framing that video up front can start to set that, well, one, calm that psychological anxiety and those questions for the student, which frees up bandwidth so they can be open to all that, instructor Mary has to give them. And it allows them to see connections more quickly, to apply theory to practice more readily, and certainly to have the opportunity to respond to questions or even Q&A or discussion board forums in the asynchronous format in a way that's more open and transparent. So I would say that's my advice up front, only because that's that sweet spot where they're you know typically fighting those questions. One other thing your comment made me think about, so you talked about these videos, and one of the things we learned through that video based work that I think applies directly to online learning and to anyone who's doing this kind of learning, or Mary, love to hear your thoughts. Choice becomes really important for students. Like the ability to create. So, my video, right? What does my virtual background looks like? Can I change my name? I can create my whole persona in these videos and share more about me. And so I think one of the things that we often miss is some of these assignments can be very checklist, like, hey, go do this, go write something, respond to two peers. But if we can create more choice for students to share aspects of themselves, what they do for a living, what their favorite colors are. And then we as instructors start to help them see those connections. Oh my gosh, four of you are working in education, four of you are working in industry, and that we use that information to create groups or learning communities. Those really show up in that belonging work. Students start to feel that sense of affiliation, which is at the core of belonging.
Wonderful. It looks like we had another question come through on the chat. So we'll just keep going through that way. One of the questions, Dr. Strayhorn, is, do you find that sense of belonging is experienced differently, or that its impact varies between generations? For example, millennial students, Gen Z students, and now Gen Alpha.
Yes, this is a fantastic question. In fact, I wrote a piece about the differences between millennials and Gen X. I'll make sure if I can find that. It had to do with some generational differences in achievement. I think this is right before I really started dropping anchor on belonging, but there's some useful insights there. Here's what we know. Sense of belonging is a human feeling. Everybody wants to belong. Where you start to see generational differences is in what it takes to satisfy that sense of belonging. Third, how that connection that I talked about earlier is facilitated, right? So my grandma, who's now deceased, she wanted to matter, she wanted to belong, and she wanted to feel connected. And she was a public school teacher too, but her connections happened in person and through the telephone. Why? Because that's what technology was at that time. She did not connect with her peers or friends or students through social media because we didn't have it. But now that we've got this generative AI, we've got a lot of technology, I think they become tools. They actually don't change fundamentally what humans are searching for. Every student wants to connect, wants to hear from and receive feedback that's affirming, even if supportive and constructive, right? But how it is shared can flow through text message, can flow through learning management systems, can flow through real-time chat, other kinds of pulse polls. I think that's where we start to see those generational differences that some people, depending on their the generational tendencies, really track onto like facility and comfort with technology versus comfort with more in-person interactions. And I think you start to see those kind of differences. I'd be happy to think about that. And now that I think about it, maybe it's a good space for us to do some sort of blog or writing coming out of this series to just think about what we know about those generational differences. To button it up, I don't see it so much in the fact that people differ generationally in the sense of whether they want it or whether they experience it, but how they go about doing it and how it's facilitated there are.
Thank you, Dr. Strayhorn. We have one other question that I am going to quickly put out. You spoke to it a little bit, and perhaps we'll hear about it more in the series moving forward. But the question is just, what are some of the ways that we can measure sense of belonging? So we'll wrap up with that question, and would love to hear your thoughts on expounding upon what you said a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great way to segue into what will, sort of close out this session, what's to come. Listen, you can measure sense of belonging a lot of different ways. I think one way that I've seen it, I mean, I've given you some hint at some scales. We will share more in the series to come. Two, but sense of belonging can be measured or detected sometimes in words. I always tell people, listen to what your students say and what they write. People who feel a sense of belonging use inclusive language. When I say inclusive, I'm talking about this. Students who feel a sense of belonging in your classroom start talking about, this is our classroom. I'm a member of it. You are there. It's possessive terms. You're my teacher. This is my friend, my peer, right? This is our learning. That's a person whose sense of belonging is anchored in that classroom and in that community. People who don't feel a sense of belonging use disassociative language. That is, how do you do things in your classroom? What am I supposed to do to pass your test? I am not a part of it. And that dissociative language, when we're mindful and attentive, can be the greatest cue we need of how students are feeling in our classrooms and learning spaces. Listen, friend, if we had more time, I'd go into more, but I know what's going to happen in a few moments. That is, I want to make sure you don't miss the 3 virtual workshops that will come to continue this dynamic series. I'm so delighted to sit down and have candid conversations with Dr. Ruby Abio Fernandez, talking about psychological safety, the hidden key to culture, retention, and belonging. That's on November 12th at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Come and hear me and Dr. Ruby to kick around this topic, and then come back on the 13th. That's a Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. I'm going to be joined by my good friend Brandon. We're going to be talking about belonging in action. How do we use belonging to transform schools and restore engagement? And as if that's not enough, come back on December 2nd. It might be getting a little cooler around where you live if you're on the East Coast, but at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be with Dr. Fisher. And Doug and I will talk about belonging, from literacy to learning acceleration. These 3 sessions will round out this series. You will leave just thirsty for more. You'll hear a lot of different insights about belonging, evidence-based, but practice rich. And I want to close with this. If no one's told you, those who are listening and watching this today, I want to be the first to tell you, you matter. You're important. You're doing important work. Your classrooms matter. Your schools matter. Your districts matter. You matter. You're enough. And you belong here just the way you are. Thanks, Julie, for joining me for today's conversation.
Thank you for the beautiful conversation, Dr. Strayhorn. I appreciate connecting with you today. And we want to remind all of the attendees that these are all being recorded. And so we ask you please share these with your colleagues and invite your colleagues to join us for the rest of the series as well. Additionally, any attendees of the virtual series will receive a 15% off discount to apply towards our new Belonging Together Elevated Professional Development, featuring individualized coaching and support from these leaders at your district. So for more information, please reach out to us at harmony@nu.edu. But in the meantime, we look forward to connecting with you again next week and to learn more from our amazing leaders and more from Dr. Strayhorn. And again, we want to thank you all for being with us. Dr. Strayhorn, thank you again for your wisdom and connecting with us. As you leave today's session, there will be a short survey that pops up. We invite you to please take a moment to fill that out so that we can know how we can do better on our end, as we're always trying to improve ourselves at Harmony. And with that, we wish you all a fabulous day and thank you for joining. Take care.